All right. Hello, everyone. For those who don't know me, I am Stephen Cook. I am the Associate Director of Education Abroad at CWU, and we're here to talk about how education abroad can influence and help your careers and your life after CWU. And we're joined by 4 CW alumni. I'm going to have them introduce themselves directly themselves in a moment. And then we'll have a conversation about their own experiences abroad and how those have kind of played into where they are now. If you are interested in studying abroad, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. My email address is stephen.cook@cwu, and I'm always happy to talk to students. So we're going to start. And so I'm going to have everybody introduce yourselves, and I'd like you to give your name, your current occupation, your years and major at CWU, so they know how long ago some of us were here, and then kind of your education abroad experiences, like what type of program it was, exchange versus faculty directed program versus third party sponsor, who the sponsor was. Exchange would be CWU, third party sponsor would be like ISA or whomever, where your program was located, how long you were there, and then what you studied while you were there as well. So let's go ahead and start with Mike, because on my screen he's right next to me.
I was really hoping you'd put a whole list of all those questions, because I don't know if I can remember all of them, but I'll go ahead and start, and you can prompt me with what else I should talk about. My name is Mike Grigg. I'm a graduate of Central and with 2 different degrees, one in business admin in 201 and one with Chinese language in 202. I am currently an organizational efficiency consultant, which means I go to different countries, different companies, or different projects helping people with change. And some of that change is with communication, some of it is with technology, and a lot of times with culture as well. So even inside US companies who are looking at their culture plans, they'll hire people like me and a team of other people to help them onboard it for all of their staff. I went to China in 2001, and I stayed there for 1 year on the CWU program. Steve, you'll have to remind me what program I did, because I know it wasn't third party. I'm pretty sure it was an exchange.
Yeah, you were an exchange with our then partner institution, Alumni University.
All right, so that's what it was. I really enjoyed the time there. I think, if anything, and for many of us have been abroad, you go through a lot of change yourself, and it's really difficult with culture shock of getting there, and also reverse culture shock of coming back. And one thing that always impresses people and employers is to say, look, I studied abroad for 1 year, and I went through an enormous amount of change that I was able to deal with. So it makes me more capable of dealing with things in the future. And I think people, at least people I talk to, are super impressed by that. I always get invited for panels at schools or talks or keynotes. I've even given some speeches to up to 1,000 people on how to deal with change when you study abroad. So it's a thing.
All right. And I did pop the list of questions in the chat so you guys can see them if you forget. And screen reconfigured. So let's go with Coco, because she is right next to me too.
Okay. Hello, I'm Jade Coco Crawford. My current occupation, I'm an assistant language teacher in Saitama, Japan. I studied at Central Washington University from 2015 to 2020. I studied abroad in Seoul, South Korea. It was CW Exchange in fall 2017, and that was for 5 months. And I studied Korean and bilingual education. I also did a CW faculty directed program in Macau, China for 3 months in fall 2018. And that was a teaching English internship. And then I also did a CW faculty directed program in Japan for 2 weeks in summer 2019. And that was a communications research trip. I studied multilingualism. So yeah, I did a lot. Let's see, what else? Oh yeah, I guess that's it. Yes.
So let's go down to Kendall now.
Awesome. So my name is Kendall Kramer. I run an online beauty business, and I'm also a behavior support specialist for a dual immersion elementary school here in my hometown, or in where I'm at currently in Corvallis, Oregon. And I studied abroad in Cusco, Peru. I was there for a semester. Any regrets I have, I should have done a year. I would go, if I could go back, I would go for the full year. But I was there through ISA, which is a third party sponsored program. And while I was there, I studied Spanish, and then I also earned my internship credits for public health through the service learning program. And let's see, I was at CWU 2016 through 2019. I transferred in as a transfer student, and I studied abroad in the fall of 2017.
All right, thank you. And last but certainly not least, let's go with Nick.
All right. Hi, I'm Nick Koblenski. I'm a paramedic lieutenant for Bonner County EMS. I was at Central from 1896 to 1900. Well, no, it just seems like it. From 1997 to 2001. I double majored in Japanese language and law and justice. I spent about a year in Japan at Shimane University through an exchange program. And while I was there, I was actually fortunate enough to get the Mombusho, the Japanese Department of Education scholarship, which covered much of my costs there, as well as gave us some travel money so we can go and explore Japan. So during my off time, I would go to Hokkaido or other places. I studied there. What I studied there initially was Japanese language, Japanese culture, that kind of thing. But partway through, they discovered I was a law major, and they started allowing me to audit some time with the law professor there. And then it turned into sitting down with a couple of law students and the professor once a week and having meetings and talking about the different systems and that kind of thing. So not only did I get a great Japanese immersion experience, but I actually had an eye-opening experience in terms of the law as well. I think if I can, one of the things that I just want to hit here, and it's going to be kind of a reoccurring thing that I talk about, is your study abroad program is going to be what you make it. If you go, you attend basic class, and then you go hang out with your friends, your American friends, you're going to come away basically having had a great vacation. If you take advantage of all that living abroad has, you'll come away with a foundational life experience. You'll draw from it for the rest of your life. And even though it was a one-year exchange, it's fundamentally altered the course of my life from that point on in a very good way.
All right, well said, Nick. Thank you. So I want to transition a little bit. And so we've heard a little bit about what your experiences were. So I wanted to ask what your motivations for studying abroad in general, and also choosing the specific programs that you did, and then what you wanted out of your experiences at the time. So not necessarily looking back on it, but when you were making the decisions in real time, what were your goals then? So let's kind of go in reverse order. We'll start with Nick. What were your motivations for choosing to go to Japan, and what did you want out of the experience at the time?
I think my motivations kind of started in high school, and I'm from Western Washington, and a lot of the schools out there offer Japanese. But I knew after 3 years of high school in Japanese that my Japanese wasn't where I wanted it. And so I knew that Japanese would be a helpful tool, or just foreign language in general, going forward. And Central Washington University had a great Japanese program. Part of the major in Japanese is to study abroad. And there were a couple of options out there, and I chose Shimane. And the reason I chose Shimane is that it is out in the middle of nowhere. We were kind of joking about it, but it's very much like going to Nebraska. Nobody knows where Nebraska is if you're from outside of the country, or very few, pointed out on a map, similar to Shimane. The advantage to that is there were very few foreigners. I figured it would be a good opportunity for me to develop friendships and participate in a daily, almost Japanese life. And that's really why I chose Shimane. I had no idea what I was going to get out of it. As a matter of fact, I didn't go in with great expectations. I went in just knowing that I needed it for my major, that I would brush up on my Japanese, and that's really what I hoped for. I thought that it might be a good way to get me into the law enforcement job, which my other major was going to cover. I figured law would be my primary major and Japanese would be kind of a fun one. I was kind of wrong about that, 180 degrees. But when I went there, I really didn't know. I really just kind of wanted to learn, wanted to experience. And later, I'm sure we'll talk about it, but years down the road is where I really understood all of the benefits, all that I'd gone through. But at the time, I just wanted to go over there and learn.
All right, wonderful, thank you. And Kendall.
I'm laughing over here because my first school, the first university I went to was actually in Nebraska. So I know the feeling of being in the middle of nowhere, super, a lot of cornfields. And so actually what motivated me to study abroad while I was at Central was my experience at my first college in Nebraska. I picked up Spanish my freshman year of college, fell in love with it. Although I hated it in high school, it was a completely different experience. I gave it another try. And then I went abroad on a professor-led trip to Panama for 2 weeks, and that really changed my worldview. And so as I was looking at schools to transfer to, honestly, study abroad was a key factor. I knew I wanted that to be part of my university experience. And so that's what I did. And Steve has been tremendously helpful, or had been at the time, with that experience and helping me narrow down my options, because I'm the type of person that wants to do everything. I want to make everything happen, and I want it to be this way, and this is what I want. And so going into it, I was like, okay, Steve, boom, boom, boom. I want to grow my Spanish language, location, and I also wrote down my service learning opportunity. Those were the three things that I really wanted. And I'll expand on that a bit, because not only just the language piece of wanting to speak Spanish, I could have gone to Spain, I could have gone elsewhere for that. But honestly, the location, like Latin America, and the culture, I wanted to be immersed in the culture. I wanted to be in a smaller town. I didn't want to be in a big city with a ton of people. I wanted to get my feet wet on the ground in the community that I was living with. I wanted to learn through that service learning opportunity too, because it was just a natural way that I felt called and tied. And even though we come from maybe different backgrounds or cultures, is a great way to bridge the gap and be more open to new opportunities. So those were some of the things that I was looking for. It honestly came down to, I think, Chile and Peru, and I chose Cusco, and I was so excited to be there because I fell in love with it right away. And honestly, going into it, it was like, I just want to soak as much up as I can and just be as present as I can, because I knew that it would go by fast. 4 months went by like that. And I'm glad that I did it. And my Spanish grew, and so many more things that we're going to talk about here in just a bit.
Wonderful, thank you. And let's go back up to Coco.
Yeah, so my motivations for choosing all the programs was, first, it all fit into my major, my minor, which is elementary education and teaching English as a second language. And so it was a big career advantage for me. And as well, I was interested in all the languages, Japanese, Korean, Chinese. So I wanted to be able to immerse myself in all those cultures and learn the languages naturally in those environments. And I also wanted to gain new perspectives, because the last two programs I did in Macau, China, and Japan, the opportunities just suddenly jumped out at me. They just came up. So of course I was like, I have to do this, because I just wanted to get out of the small town of Ellensburg. And I also grew up in a small town, Roy, Washington. So to me, my world seemed so small. So I just wanted to branch out and grow and challenge myself by living in a new culture, new environment, and just be able to learn new languages and survive on my own. So that's mine.
All right, Mike.
Well, I think my biggest motivation was actually avoiding something. I didn't want to take Spanish or philosophy, and I saw Chinese down there, and I had a lot of Chinese friends in my business classes. So I was like, oh, I'll just take this. And I ended up liking it and then telling my business mentor about it. And he jumped on it. He said, oh, you can get all these scholarships. And after you get out, you can get all these different types of jobs. And of course, I wanted a job as soon as I graduated. So that sounded very exciting to me. I did the same thing Nick did. I chose a city that was so far away. It was maybe even deeper south than Nebraska was. It was this province called Anhui, and the city was called Hefei. And I didn't know until I got there just how overwhelming actually it would all be. There was like 5 or 6 million people living there. I thought it was a small town like Roy. I didn't know there'd be so many people, so such a dense population. But it really worked out well. I think in addition to me, there was 3 other Americans there and maybe 30 total Europeaners who also spoke some English. But it was a very immersive program, doing school 4 or 5 hours a day, in addition to a lot of studying. I wish I had more time to hang out with my friends like Nick did, but I was probably more into the books and studying for my fluency exam, which has helped me out tremendously since getting officially certified in the language. Language helps make me sort of available also to government jobs like at the DoD or at Commerce, that kind of thing.
Right. Both Mandarin and Japanese particularly are considered critical need languages by the Department of State. So there's a lot of demand for speakers of that, and for students, there's a lot of scholarships that can come with studying those languages as well. And Spanish isn't necessarily a critical need language because it's very common, but studying in Latin America is something that there are scholarships to help encourage, because it is broadly speaking, a less common destination. So that's great. So we talked about what you were thinking at the time. So let's kind of start looking back at it. And so now in your current positions, and obviously we've got 2 people who are basically right out of college, and then 2 people who, like me, are less than right out of college. A little more than right out of college, I guess, is better. Looking back at almost 20 years at this point. So kind of in different stages of life. So what do you see as the benefits to your programs now, or that you've gained that you can see now? And what are some of the skills that you obtained from the experience, specifically that apply in your current work lives and even personal lives? And you don't necessarily have to stay completely within this, because I know there might be other things that aren't captured in the question. And Nick, I want to start with you specifically because you're in a position that there's not necessarily an obvious straight line between studying in Japan and being a paramedic. So what do you see in both personally and professionally that you take from your experience in Japan and apply?
Yeah, it kind of makes sense. I was a law major and a Japanese major, and now I'm a paramedic. I use Japanese probably at least monthly in my day-to-day job. I think kind of overarchingly, if I look back where I am now, I am so glad that I took advantage of the opportunities that were there. And I would highly recommend, if you're in college, take advantage of the opportunities, because the academics are incredibly important. So are the experiences. And I think Michael mentioned earlier, and it's a great back and forth, because it is incredibly important to be in the books. It's incredibly important to experience things like study abroad as well. Personally, I think what it's really given me, and it's something that really has an effect on my day-to-day job, is a better understanding of the world around me. There's an old joke that the quickest way to make the rest of the world disappear is to turn on the American news. And that's kind of true. I don't think it's just for Americans. I think that in general, most places kind of stick to their own thing. But in our day-to-day lives, we build our friends and our community kind of around who's around us. Through programs like either like an Asia University Exchange, or for me, for Shimane Exchange, I still communicate daily with my friends. I communicate daily with a couple of instructors, the law professor from back there. I still communicate quite often with. I've had experiences that I take with me that not a lot of other people have. I've climbed Mount Fuji a couple times. personally, I had a host family while I was over there for a time. And again, we still talk day to day. One of the things, a little funny story, my host mother went across town to buy me this specialty from the town called takoyaki. And she brought it back. I mean, she must have been gone an hour and a half or 2 hours. And she brought it back specifically for me. And it was the worst thing I have ever tasted. But of course, I can't tell her that. She's just done this for me. And I'm learning about the Japanese culture, trying to be, kind. And I couldn't eat it. And I got so sick that night. And I told my host brother, hey, I'm really sick. And he said, let me tell my mom. Don't tell mom. Over 20 years later, every time I go back, he makes his mom go and get me takoyaki because he thinks it's hilarious. Those are the types of experiences that you have. Those are the types of relationships that you can build. And that's not even touching on the day-to-day skills yet. Those are formative experiences that you have. I think something that changed that I use in my day-to-day life, I got very sick when I was in Japan. IV fluids, the whole 9 yards. And it's scary if you're abroad and your Japanese language is conversational, but it is nowhere near specialty medical language. But I learned a lot through that. Not just the language. The language is part of it. But I learned what it's like to be scared, to be alone, to not understand what was happening, to have all sorts of people around you trying to explain to you something. And you're just like, I don't know, just do what you got to do. It's terrifying. I will never forget that. And in my job now, it doesn't matter if you're an international student or just a average person. I can relate to that a little better. Professionally, I think that there are a couple of things that have come from this. I teach other police officers, firefighters, paramedics, and emergency personnel basic international intercultural communications. Very basic. I'm not talking about speaking a second language, but things like avoiding slang, things like certain types of body language, that kind of thing. Something I never would have thought of if I'd just become a paramedic without living abroad. The language itself, I will never forget. I was at actually Eastern for a structure fire, and they had evacuated. And one of the Japanese students there was having a panic attack. She didn't know it was a panic attack. She didn't know what was happening, but she didn't understand what was happening around her. I was able to go over, take care of her, and speak to her in Japanese, explain to her that everything would be okay, and kind of walk her through it. I have people that call me while they're on the way to the hospital and say, hey, I need you to translate for me. And I'll talk to them over the speakerphone. We have things like Language Line, but those take forever to get to. And I think really the last thing I want to talk about is I developed the courage to try new things. I developed the desire to reach for goals, things that I didn't even know if they were attainable. Long shots like applying for jobs in New York that I didn't think I had a prayer for. And I wound up being a paramedic in New York for many years. I became a flight paramedic. These are things that I just never envisioned that I was capable of. Because of my language and because of the experience through some of the jobs, I have been part of special operations deployments. I've been at Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, Gustav, Ike, and other natural disasters. And I was specifically chosen for those teams as part because of the language. There's no way for us to know when we go over and we start the study abroad what we're going to get out of it. I was very simplistic in my ideas. I just wanted to get through it. I enjoyed it. I wanted to have fun, but there's no way to understand the depth and breadth of impact that it will have in your life going forward and in mine, professionally and personally. So sorry, I think that was probably pretty long, but it was some things that I'd been thinking about, and study abroad was very important.
That was great. I appreciate it. I mean, I would agree. I think there's a certain amount where it's one of the things I've got out of study abroad is that I realize that plans are temporary, right? Or they're loose, so that you have to be a little bit prepared and okay with things not going the way you planned. And for me, that's included life and jobs and things like that. So I appreciate that. I think also that we don't necessarily always value or understand the full value or impact of experiences until much later. So I want to go to Kendall, and Kendall, you know the question, but also I'm interested, since you're working in education, among other things, and most of the Spanish speakers in the US in general and in Washington and Oregon do speak a Latin American dialect of Spanish, probably Mexican of mostly, but certainly it's more steered towards Latin American than Castilian. I'm wondering if your experience in Latin America, you've been able to apply that to education and the people that you work with.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start with answering that question. I mean, daily, I'm working with kids who maybe they're speaking Spanish in the home or they're learning Spanish at school. And it's different when you're able to connect with them on their level. It's different when you're able to understand, and there's so much colloquial languages between countries and words that we have in Spanish that I'm still a student of the language. I'm still a student of the game. And I think that that's a beautiful thing that we have within languages, is that we can still learn from one another. But yeah, I would say it absolutely has helped me be able to connect with the people I work with in my local community daily, to have that background compared to maybe had I gone to Spain, it would have looked a lot different, I think.
And then
I'll jump into, I have the question here about the benefits that I see and the skills that I've obtained. I wrote some notes, so I'm gonna be looking down at those, but I will just say, like, tangibly, at every interview that I've had since graduating, I have brought up my abroad experience. There's been something that they asked during the interview that I'm like, oh my gosh, I did that when I was abroad. And so, like, the level of confidence that is boosted when you have like tangible, concrete examples on how you overcame something or what you do in a stressful situation, all of that you get through a study abroad. And so that has been such a tremendous thing for me in my life. And it's like, this experience has literally paved the path for my life. This has shaped who I am as a person and who I'm continuing to grow into. And so some of the biggest things are just like the ability to take risk. I mean, I went to a completely foreign country. I didn't know a soul. Like, I jumped in and like I was working with a lawyer, and we were working on workshops on Indigenous rights and human rights and things that, like, oh my goodness, like, here's me, like Kendall Kramer from Ellensburg, Washington, going and making this type of impact, getting to know these type of people in a completely different world. So to be able to have that experience and bring it back is just absolutely priceless. And a lot of people, like employers specifically these days, are looking, and just the way our world's moving, like, you need to be flexible, you need to be adaptable, you need to be able to think outside the box. It's like being relatable and being empathic and compassionate. I think all these things that come along with not just studying abroad, but being intentional about your experience abroad. Because I want to mention that, because I would say that there were other students, so I went with a third party program. There were other students within this program that were also from the US who had a completely different experience than me, because they chose a different path while they were abroad. And so by choosing to be in the service learning program, choosing to take the classes I took, and choosing to step outside my comfort zone, instead of taking the Uber, taking the public bus many times, those were transformative. Those were what gave me that personal confidence, that growth, that ability to see things in new ways. And so honestly, like, I can't hone in on this enough. It really pays, this experience, like, and it shows up every day in my daily life, like networking professionally. It shows up in the students that I work with, my coworkers, how I interact, how I show up, how I think, and like my long-term vision and goals are all shaped to this. Since studying abroad, I've been back once, and like, my heart was so warm. Like, it felt like I was back in my hometown again. Like, these places, you feel a part of them. and then that connection with the homestay family, Janet and Cesar, like I still talk to them. Mapi, my sister, like I talk to them frequently. I would say weekly to monthly. And especially with the pandemic going on, we were checking in on each other. We were like, how are you doing? What's it like there? Like, oh, they're like, yes, we're doing well, we're safe, thank you. And so it's like these things that, gosh, I'm so glad that I said yes and went through all the applications to apply for grants and scholarships and made the sacrifices financially and spent so much time in Steve's office to make this happen, because I would not be who I am today if I did not go abroad.
Thank you. And Mike, with you, kind of same questions, but also I know, by virtue of our friendship, I know that you spent many years afterwards in China and relatively recently came back. So obviously there's a little bit more of a concrete connection in that way too for you. So how would you kind of look back at your experiences in China? I guess both the study abroad experience, because that's what we're trying to get our students to do, but then also with your working experience, and how has that kind of helped and benefited you? And
yeah, thanks, Steve. And first of all, I'd like to say from Nick and Kendall, the fantastic stories. Wow, I really feel like I should outdo it in some way, but I don't think I can. Those were perfect. I can't wait to hear the recording here. Yeah, I went to China early on, and I actually did 2 years there. 1 year for study abroad with Central, and then 1 year later to do the certificate program, which is even more intensive. When I came back to the States, I found one of the first benefits was, getting a lot of interviews. So like Nordstrom's wanted to hire me, Starbucks wanted to hire me, Macy's wanted to hire me. I would just type an application and say, look, I studied abroad in China for 1 year plus a year. And I had a lot, like the foot in the door for interviews. So I had a lot of, I would say just more opportunities because of that study abroad experience. But then there's the sort of the deeper, like personal benefits that it gives you too. And this was something that, I realized a little bit during the study abroad program, but even more after living in the country for 15 years. During the study abroad program, I'd say some of the best benefits are the things that are hardest to learn. Like, I think being American and going to school in America, we're kind of taught that America is global already, and that, because of the diversity here, that you are capable in doing business anywhere around the world because you're American. But it's not really true. There's so many different mindsets and perspectives that people carry on in their own country. And I'm reminded now of a story that Steve and I share from China, which is even on a hot summer day after you're exercising, people will serve you hot water. And to me, it just goes against everything I learned at the time in America, which was you need cold water to cool yourself down so you can avoid getting heat sickness. And there they have the opposite. They say if you drink cold water on a hot day, your stomach can hurt and you can get dysentery from it. So they believe in different things, and that impacts our belief. And at first it's hard because you feel like these people are kind of challenging my beliefs. But then as you grow into it and you try new things, you realize that you as a person change, you grow with that. You become more capable of doing more things. And that's probably one of the biggest benefits that I take away from that, and then I use later on. I was lucky that I got to work for a couple of big companies in China. I did a project with Accenture, helped them start their business in China, and then moved on with a couple other big consultancies. Of course, I worked for a smaller one, and because of policy and everything, but was really able to kind of get into the country on a much, much deeper basis. And China's a huge country and has a lot of history. And I think though all of us have gone to countries with, 1,000+ years history or 5,000+ years history. These countries have a lot of culture. And an example I just think of off the top of my head is in, the weather where I was so much different than it is here. Seattle right now is pretty cold. It's like, it froze last night. But in China at this time of the year, it's still kind of warm where I was at. It was, probably 65, 70 degrees where I was at. And I felt warm. I thought it was like a Seattle summer. So I was wearing a t-shirt and shorts, but the culture in China is so thick that people who you don't even know, strangers off the street, will come up to you and they'll tell you, hey, you're not wearing enough clothes, you're going to get sick. Because that's what they do. They share what they believe. And even though you don't know this person, have any connection to them, they will tell you that because they are interested in keeping the culture alive. They're interested in sharing things and being of use. And that's something that I just didn't feel in the US, and I still don't feel. I could walk out naked on Green Lake today, and probably a couple eyes would roll, but it wouldn't be, nobody would come up to me except for maybe the police and tell me that I need to put some clothes on.
Maybe because you're in Seattle, but
right. I think overall though, it's this, we don't know this at the time, but we don't have a lot of perspective, and that's what study abroad can give you. We don't know it at the time, but we have a lot of inner beliefs of the way the world works, but it may not be the same perspectives that other people have at the way their world works. So it makes us more accepting of that.
Thanks, Mike. I think you touched on something that I learned also from my experience in China. As you mentioned, the strangers coming off of the street is, in the US, we have a reputation for being very direct, whereas China's reputation is talking around subjects. And whereas I think in reality, we just choose to be direct about different things. So we don't necessarily talk about, or we're acculturated not to talk about weight or salary or things like that directly. Whereas, I remember having Chinese people come up to me and go, do you know you are fat? Like, yes, I do know that. So it's like, but there are other things that are taboo that they won't, or that they will talk around and won't talk to you directly. So I think that's that's part of kind of figuring out a culture is.
Right, the topics that are taboo.
Right, and that kind of gets to another thing you mentioned that I remember reading a book by Fareed Zakaria. He's talking about the post-American world, and he mentions kind of like you touched on it. He talks about doing business abroad and kind of with the idea of English as a global language. And yes, that's true. These are the people that you're working with are having private conversations in their own language and based on their own culture, so that you're kind of at a disadvantage because you're part of half the conversation. So
yeah, a lot of truth in that too.
And then finally, let's go to Coco, and who is living abroad and kind of in some ways living the experience as we speak. So
yeah, I'd say some of the skills I gained were confidence, mainly because all throughout like elementary to high school and part of university, I was a very reserved and shy person. I didn't really talk to too many people. I didn't go outside my bounds of my small circle. So being able to convince myself to go abroad, I gained a new sense of confidence and independence because I was put in situations where there was very few foreigners and where I didn't speak the language that well or at all. And so being able to put myself in that situation, I gained confidence and independence, as well as a new cultural awareness. I'm from the small town Roy, as I said before, and there's not much of a culture there at all. So seeing a new culture in person and not just in books or through anime or something was, I'm forever grateful for that. A big thing for me professionally was being able to communicate through language barriers, because right now I'm an English teacher in Japan and there's no foreigners in my schools and no one speaks English. So there's just me and then 20 plus other teachers and staff who just speak Japanese. And so I'm just in a situation where I have to communicate through that as I'm still learning the language and the culture. And another thing about culture is that no matter how prepared you think you are or how much you think you know, you'll always go through culture shock. Even now, I've been here for almost 2 years and I feel like I'm still shocked about things every day. So it's just good. Don't over prepare yourself. Just go into it with an open mind and be ready for anything to be thrown at you. But studying abroad gives you a unique opportunity, and it can also open the world to the others there. And you can diminish any stereotypes that they may have about your culture or what you look like or something. Like when I was doing my introductions at each of my new schools, everyone thought I was from Spain or India. So I'm like, no, I'm from America. And they're all surprised by that. So they also have their own stereotypes. So being able to open their worlds was a great opportunity for me. And yeah. Mhm.
So, Coco, one thing I want to ask is, so this is your first long-term experience in Japan. So your previous experience in the country of Japan was what, 2 weeks long, right?
Yes.
But you spent a semester in Korea and a quarter in Macau, and you had experience with Japanese students because you, like Nick and me, worked with AUAP on campus.
Yes.
But I'm curious, so how much, one, did the experience with AUAP help with your transition? And two, how much did your experiences in Macau and Korea help with your transition to living in Japan?
So with AUAP, it definitely helped a lot because I was working directly with university-age Japanese students. So since I teach English and I was working with them learning English, it definitely helped me professionally over here, as well as learning more about their culture. And that was one thing that prepared me the most for Japan, because even them being in America, I was still being culture shocked there, taking care of everyone. And for Korea and Macau, that experience, what was the question?
Because it's very easy to overstate this, but there are cultural similarities, right?
Yeah, yes.
East Asia, they're very different from one another, but they're all East Asian cultures. So did those experiences in Korea and Macau, did that kind of help prepare you for living in Japan in any way? Or is it, besides, just working through language barriers and things like that, is there something a little more direct, I guess?
I'd say part of it, mostly it's just working through the language barriers, but the cultures, all three of them are so very, very different. So I guess I'd just say it made me not expect anything. I just went in not expecting anything, and just whatever happened. So yeah.
And that's a good thing to keep in mind, that yes, they're all in East Asia, but they're also very different from one another. And they all have their own historical relationships, which affect things as well. And kind of on that note, Nick, you studied in a place, in Japan that is definitely not what a lot of Americans, I think, would view of Japan, or it could be, but in a more kind of parochial sense. You think of like the movie The Last Samurai, more kind of romanticized version of Japan. And I think one thing that we don't always realize is the kind of the cultural diversity within other countries. So I'm kind of curious with that, because you've obviously traveled in the Tokyo area, which would be, I think, what most Americans would think of when they think of Japan. What kind of cultural differences did you see between the two, other than just the fact that there weren't any foreigners, I guess, in Shimane, or very few of them anyway?
Yeah, so I am actually, one of the things that studying abroad taught me is that I could live abroad. So after I graduated, I went back for a few years, and I actually lived in Tokyo. When I was in high school, I was an exchange student in Osaka. So I've had a chance to live in the big cities and had a chance to live out in the country. I think that while there are similarities, just as in America, there is a broader American culture, but every city in America is very different. Everything from the things that they're known for, to the way they talk, the way they interact with people. And that's very similar to Japan. And my very rudimentary understanding of China is that it's very similar there with language. But you kind of have to learn a different language to travel because they speak a different form of Japanese everywhere you go. They use very different words in situations. Even though there's an overarching Japanese, it's just like going to Alabama and thinking that somebody from Seattle is going to understand everything that's being said. And that's just not the reality. And that's part of why I enjoyed living there so much, is because it was so different. That is one of the things that sticks with me to this day. It to an outsider, I think the Japanese culture almost appears to be a culture of contradictions, because you go to one place and the culture is one way. You go to another place and they do things very differently. And you, as the outsider, have to reconcile that. To them, that's just the way it is. That's the way it's always been. And I think that's probably very true for somebody coming here as well. You go to Seattle and then you go to New York or Miami or something, and it's probably similar. I spent, I guess, a total of almost 5 years there, and I still came away with a desire to know more. I certainly don't to this day feel like I have a good understanding of it. I don't know that anybody does. But kind of the flip side of this conversation is I did come away with, as strange as it is, a better understanding of my own culture. When I'm studying abroad or living abroad and people ask me questions about, well, why are you doing that? I actually have to think about it. What was exactly what I would just always do without thinking about it. Now I have to explain myself or explain why we do things. And I learned just how much I didn't know about my own culture. And the fact that there is a culture was something that blew my mind. I live day to day as an American, and then I go abroad and I'm like, well, this is completely different. So I learned a lot, not just about the cultures inside of Japan, because there are many and they are varied, but the appreciation for my own was something I gained as well. Hope that answers the question.
It does for me. Thank you. Mike, I want to ask you kind of a similar question, because you obviously studied in Anhui, which as you said is remote city, I guess is probably the right word for it.
Good way to describe it. Yeah.
But then you kind of lived and worked in the kind of Suzhou, Shanghai area too, which particularly Shanghai has a long history of foreign interaction, diversity. Not always necessarily in a positive sense, but it has. So I guess I think China also was one with maybe a little bit more than Japan, but still maybe we don't always fully understand the cultural diversity. I mean, certainly I didn't until I lived there, and even then was kind of cursory. So I'm curious, kind of how you would answer this kind of a similar question, what you found while you were there.
About the different cultures across.
Yeah, right.
Oh, it's, every city you go to was very proud of their city, very proud of their area. And of course, the language was different. We studied Mandarin, but Mandarin is just like the business language. Then there's all the dialects, and there's thousands of dialects. Was very hard for me, I think, going to a remote place versus like Beijing, because in Beijing, everybody speaks the common language. But in that remote area, we would learn Mandarin, and then on the street, we would have to learn the dialect. And so you're learning, the written, the spoken, two spoken languages. It was incredibly challenging for me at the time. Every city has a lot of culture, and mind you, Seattle's been a city for since 1891. It's like 130 years. Shanghai's been a city in their textbooks for nearly 6,000 years. It's incredibly deep rooted in the culture, and it's really something that's so challenging to understand, I guess, until you get there and you talk to locals and they tell you about their culture. And then when you start traveling, you go to other places, and then those locals will tell you about their culture. And I agree with Nick a lot too, that one thing they have too is they believe that, at least in China, is they believe that their view of Shanghai and China was the view of China, and that was just not the case. I'd go up to Beijing, they'd say, our view is the view of China. So they talk in a way which to me was very confusing. They'd say things like, well, Chinese people do things this way. And if you after traveling around a little bit, you realize, well, actually, these Chinese people in the South are different than the Chinese in the middle, then different from the Chinese in the North. You come back with these broad sort of stereotypes or characterizations of people in those areas. But it was very much a learning sort of curve for me as well. And I talked earlier about you become more of a person because needing to be adaptable and flexible. Kendall had mentioned this too. But when you go into some of those other cities, you find yourself being challenged even more, but it becomes easier and easier to deal with. And I think as a person, that's quite a big benefit. Not sure if I'm still answering the question or not.
It works. And Kendall, in Peru, obviously Quechua is prevalent, probably, certainly more so than a lot of the indigenous languages in the United States. So I'm curious, what your experience with and you obviously worked with indigenous communities in your, as you said, in your service learning components. So I'm curious what lessons you've drawn from that experience in terms of the Spanish culture and then also being in Quechua, which is definitely different linguistically and probably culturally, and how you're bringing that kind of understanding or experience into where you are now.
Yeah, really, I would say it was another opportunity to learn and expand my worldview in like the roots and the culture of Peru specifically, because Quechua, but also Aymara is another indigenous language down there. And it was depending on where we traveled. I think almost every weekend while I was there, I went with a group of friends or locals, and we went somewhere new in Peru, in the country. And we were able to travel a lot and learn about different areas. And just depending on where we were, you could see that language, the indigenous languages would pop up. And it's really interesting is we actually have a really strong Guatemalan culture and presence here in Corvallis. And a lot of the people that we work with, families, I used to work at the county in the health department. A lot of our families speak Hmong, and that's an indigenous language. And so when we're thinking about creating health materials or educational materials to send home to families, if we send it home in Spanish, they're not going to be able to understand or communicate with us that way. And so it's really opened up awareness and on ways to bridge those gaps. Even to this day, not just while we were learning about the culture and the language down in Peru, but also here in like what I do every day. And so it feels really good as a human to be able to bring that perspective to the workplace and to be able to like add that piece of it that might have been missing had I not had that Peruvian experience while I studied.
Wonderful. Kind of one last question that doesn't even necessarily have to be work related. I think some of you guys touched on it, or multiple of you guys kind of touched on it, on experiences that you get into stressful situations or challenging situations. So I'm curious, what in your experience while you were abroad was your most kind of culturally challenging experience? Not necessarily professionally, but just in general, like kind of when you're in experiences like, I'm not sure how to navigate this, or you had to learn something. Well, it could be cultural based, or it could just be, not being understanding of systems. Like for me, one of the things was I forgot my passport and going from Austria to Hungary at a time where they were actually doing border checks. So, and I didn't figure it out until like right before the border. So I had to go back and then get another train to go back to Hungary. So I spent 11 hours on trains in one day, so I've never really forgotten my passport after that. The other thing, like in China, I noticed, like, I didn't realize it until it was made me aware, but, dairy is not necessarily a huge part of the Chinese diet. I would say the same is probably true of Japan. And I didn't realize how much I kind of missed cheese until some magically appeared at Carrefour. And so those are some of like the cultural lessons that I've learned, and kind of going and learning about me. So I'm curious what some of your own experiences might be in that vein, and then feel free. So whoever, I'm not going to pick anybody. So we don't talk over each other. Why don't you guys, well, I guess I will. So let's start with Mike.
Well, tough question. I've seen my fair share of challenges. I'm just remembering off the top of my head, I was sick too with dysentery for, in the second week that I got there, and my Chinese Mandarin was horrible. I couldn't even order things off the menu. It was so bad. I think, yeah, that's one experience. Another experience was almost getting in a fight with people. That was pretty scary, over a miscommunication. Coming out of a bar where I'd been drinking and other people were drinking too, and how to navigate that, getting out of that. Yeah. Even a little thing about forgetting my key to my dormitory one day, or losing it, and trying to explain to the room people that I needed another key. And it's kind of a funny story, because in Chinese, the word for key is yao shi, and the word for I want to commit suicide is yao si. So they sound very similar. So I went up to the the room people and I was like, hey, I need a new key. But what they heard was, I want to commit suicide. So they started laughing, and they're like poking fun at me, and oh, you want to commit suicide? Oh, how are you going to do it? You're going to hang yourself? I remember I didn't speak really well Chinese, so I thought I was asking for a key, but then they're showing like hang self, kill self, and I was like, what's going on here? It was hilarious, because that night everybody else was like from the dormitory was out somewhere else, and I was the only one there. So my normal group of people that I would rely on was like a Danish friend or a Korean friend or a Japanese friend, and they would help me communicate because their English was awesome and their Chinese was much, much better than mine. But so I literally was in this lobby for 4 hours trying to explain that I needed a key, and I couldn't touch the keys because they had them, and I was pointing over there at a key, and they were like, yeah, these are keys, but you want to commit suicide, and they start laughing again. For them, it was just 4 hours of entertainment, but I went through all the things. Like I got very angry and I was shouting, but that didn't help. I kind of calmed down, and I sat on the couch for a while, and they'd come over and say, what do you want? You want to kill yourself again? And that was kind of how it precipitated, until finally I sat down and I drew a picture of a key, and then I drew a picture of a door, and I said, key in the door, this is what I need. And they're like, oh, you're not saying yao si, you're saying yao shi. And I was like, yes. And they're like, oh, you need a key. And then they grabbed a key, and I was like, all I had to do was kind of explain it in a drawing, and that might help them. And I think even to this day, when people don't get stuff, I turn around to a whiteboard and I write it down. I'm like, now do you get it? And then it makes it much easier. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. How about Nick? And we've already, I'm sure being in the hospital was probably the most stressful for you. So maybe what would be the second one?
Well, actually, that might have been the second most. The first most was I got into a car accident.
Oh, okay.
Over there at the time, I don't know if we're still allowed to or not, but I was old enough to rent a car. And so I was in Tokyo, and I rented a car and went to Asia University and picked up a couple of my former AUAP students. And we were out kind of having fun, just hanging around the city. And of course, I'm on the wrong side of the car, and I'm still pretending like I know what I'm doing. I have no clue. And I swiped the side of the car. Well, that would have been tough enough, except the guy looks at the car and says, there's not too much damage. I'm okay. And he leaves. Well, that should have been a relief, except I still have to have a police report. And I still have to go back to the rental company. And so now I'm trying to convince the officer that I had to drive to that I didn't hit and run somebody. I got into a car accident. He left. So he had to have me ride in the car with me back to where it happened to go and talk to the shop owner. but I thought for sure I was going to get arrested. I was going to be in jail for 150 years. It was incredibly stressful. And again, I didn't have any legal language knowledge. I didn't know what was happening. I could tell them that I hit something, I hit a guy, he left. But sometimes, and going back to what Mike was saying, sometimes the best way to communicate is to stop communicating, to stop what you're saying, go back to the beginning and figure out a different way to approach it. And that's something that out of those type of situations I learned. And that's something that when I talk to other police officers, other firefighters, medics, that's what I tell them. I'm like, we get so amped up, we get so into it, and we're just compounding whatever problem is already there. The one thing I learned specifically from that car accident is just go back to the beginning, keep it simple, go back to the beginning, start over, try again. And that, made a big difference. But those were the two kind of high points of my travels, I guess.
I think you kind of alluded to it with on the wrong side of the car, but it should be noted also for those who are watching that Japan drives on the left side of the road as the UK does, as opposed to the right side as we do. So there's kind of a learning curve in that, I'm sure.
Well, that was the problem, is I was supposed to curve and drove straight. So.
All right. How about you, Coco?
Okay, well, let's see. In Japan, let's see. Recently, it happened to me. A policeman had stopped me when I was at the station. I saw him coming for me because I know this happens a lot. Is they try to ask you for your residence card because a lot of foreigners come in and they overstay their visas. And I saw him coming for me, and so I tried to avoid eye contact, but he just kept coming at me, and so what scared me the most is that I did not have my residence card with me, but I knew it was going to happen because I keep it with like all my important stuff at home because I'm scared to lose my stuff. But he kept coming at me, and then he stayed with me for like 30 minutes, and I was supposed to meet a friend to go see a movie, but now I was late for the movie. And he asked me all these questions in Japanese. Where are you from? Where do you work? Why are you here? And I had nothing to prove it. So later that night, policemen actually came to my apartment to prove that I'm supposed to be here. So that was a terrifying experience because I'm like, I don't have it. Please don't. I need to go. Leave me alone. But yeah, that was pretty terrifying. And then there's another experience in Korea. It's really cheap to get your ears pierced in Korea. So I went and got so many piercings on one of my ears. And I had a piercing here, but there was a ball and it had fell into my ear. So I ended up having to go to a hospital, but they have specialty doctors in Korea. So you can't just go to a hospital. It's similar in Japan. You have to go to one for your ear or something. So I went to 3 different places. And they kept saying, no, this is the wrong place. You need to go here. And I'm like, I don't know where to go because my Google Maps wasn't leading me to right places. And then I found out the place was actually right in front of my university. And then when I went there, actually everyone spoke English. So that part was a plus, but it was a journey.
Glad I didn't know about that at the time. And Kendall, how about you?
Yeah, so I was thinking about culturally challenging things. I don't remember anything horrible or traumatic y'all are sharing happening. But some of the cultural differences that I really noticed that were totally different was, so I very independent college student in the US living on my own, and then I went and studied abroad and lived with my homestay family, and lovely family, and I love them dearly. And it was living with mom and dad again. And so we had various house rules around they always wanted to know where I was or always wanted to know what I was up to. And I totally understand the safety piece of it, but that was a very drastic change from living independently as a college student to living under someone else's roof. They want to know your whereabouts. And then also it's part of the Peruvian culture where you actually live with your parents. My sister Mapi, she was 30 years old at the time. And so it's normal to live with your family until you get married and then you leave. It's not like you turn 18 and move out of the house, which is fairly common here in the US. So that was definitely a big adjustment. And then the other piece was just like how long things took to get done, like something that I would have thought of like creating this poster and getting it printed and like doing these like small tasks to me felt like, oh, and like if I was at home, I could get them done like that at the library. Whereas when I was in Peru, it's like we didn't have access to that. So we would have to go to the like 3 different places to find the copier or like download it and then take it somewhere. And so a lot of things just like the process just looked different to get done. And so that was kind of like something that was definitely different. And then the last one I'll share was in restaurants, it's common in the US to have a server or a waiter come and serve you and like check in on you and then like bring you your receipt. But it's common in Peru, what we noticed was like, okay, so we sit down and we're eating and like they won't come over until you ask for something or you ask for the check. And so honestly, I kind of liked it better because we could spend as much time as we wanted at that restaurant or cafe. And like a lot of my friends, we would go do homework or we would go out for coffee and we would just be there for most of the day. And like that was totally culturally normal to stay there. Whereas I feel like in the US, there's a lot of pressure to like get in and get out and like turn tables from the restaurant industry. Whereas in Peru, it was really like, take your time, enjoy your conversation, enjoy your meal, and then like ask for la cuenta when you're ready to go. And so that was a big adjustment that I really appreciated about the culture as well.
It's kind of funny you should mention that because that was one of my most immediate, that was connected to one of my most immediate versions of, or aspects of reverse culture shock when I came back from graduate school in Poland, because in Poland it's very similar in the wait staff, you know, they're there if you need them, but they're not right at your table every, you know, 2 minutes or whatever it is checking on you. You know, they'll over. At least it was at the time. It's been a while since I've been back. And then, so I flew to Chicago to spend Thanksgiving with family in that area. And then my uncle, I'd literally just gotten off the plane. My uncle took me to lunch at a Applebee's style restaurant. And the server is just right there rattling off his or her name, all of this. And I'm just internally, I'm going, I am not ready for this. Please step back. Because I'm used to like, okay, flag him down when you're ready and call him. It was just like, I'm just kind of internally freaking out at that point. It was like, don't do this, please. So it's funny, you kind of had a similar experience. So we're close to time, and I want to wrap up just by throwing it open to you guys. Is there anything that you want to mention that we didn't get to cover today? So just quick, maybe, 5 minutes each. We'll start with Kendall.
Yeah, honestly, we talked about a lot of great things here. And so I really just want to like open my arms to you as CWU students. If you have questions or curiosities about study abroad, of course, use Steve as a resource. Like I've said multiple times, like he was my #1 go-to with helping apply for grants. I actually got the Gilman Scholarship Award to help study abroad and make all of that possible, like talking with my advisors, figuring out the whole credit situation, making it work for public health and Spanish. Like he's the person to help you. But if you just want to chat about, like, maybe you have other questions about what it was like or picking a place, like, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm happy to pass along my info to Steve and he can connect us. Because I know there's questions that come up along the way that you might not be thinking of right now, or maybe you're just like, man, like, I don't know, or maybe even while you're abroad, like I'm gonna be honest, I was homesick at times. It wasn't all like butterflies and rainbows. There were times that I was crying home to my parents saying like, this is so tough right now. But at the end of the day, it's worth it. You can see through our stories and our experiences how this one choice to go abroad, to put ourselves out there, to do something completely new and outside our comfort zone has transformed our lives. And I truly believe that everyone needs to go abroad and see a different way of life. And as I end, I'm just going to share that like one of my missions and goals in life since this experience is to create funding for students to go abroad. Like my vision is to be paying for 7,000 students a year to go, like fully paid for to go abroad, because I believe in it that much. And it's a goal of mine. I don't know when it's going to happen or how it's going to happen, but it's happening. And so if you have questions, reach out. If there's something that we didn't touch on, definitely let Steve know, but you won't regret it when you go.
Thank you. Coco?
I'd just like to say that you can do it. A lot of people have reservations about going abroad. Don't, just do it. Don't let anything hold you back. There's resources at CW. Steve, there's resources outside CW that can allow you to go. I think you'd regret more not going than going. There's a lot of homesickness or even finance worries maybe, but there's so many things out there that can help you achieve that dream of going abroad. And I would say just go. So, yeah. And also if you have any questions about Japan or other study abroad experiences, I'm here as well.
Wonderful, thank you. Mike?
I agree with what Coco and Kendall had said too. It's an amazing experience. I would never trade it in for anything else, even including all the challenges that you go through. It just makes you a better person overall. And make use of the resources again that are at the university, because I don't think I would have gone had it not been for the help I got from the international department at the time, and from my two mentors, one in economics and one in foreign languages. Josh Nelson, by the way, Nick, incredibly inspirational people. Also, find some people who are studying abroad too, and talk to them about their experiences. Even foreigners that go to school there at Central can give you some perspective. And I think I did other things too, like joining some clubs, like the multinational club at Central, and joined some. I even was in like a marketing club that chose a different country to market some kind of product in, and we got to learn a lot about that country and have people come and at least give some kind of video conference, just like we're doing now. Yeah, a lot of, and it's like Coco said too, it's just, you can do it if you want to. It's like a light switch. If you want to go, turn it on. It's that simple. Thanks.
Thanks. And last but not least, Nick.
I guess what I would say is to all the Central students that might be considering study abroad or just Central students, or you're in college, live it up. You've got so many opportunities right now, educationally, culturally. Take advantage of it. Study abroad made a huge difference in my life. And I think almost anybody you talk to, whether they loved the program, didn't love the program, they're never going to tell you it didn't make a difference in their life. You are going to come away with an understanding of things that you would never have otherwise. I think college, like I said before, it is what you make it. Your study abroad is going to be what you make it. Hold on one second here. Can you hear me over the noise out there? Okay. I think you're going to have a lot of opportunity in college to decide what you want to do, decide how you want to do it. And just don't be afraid of it. Grasp it, take advantage of the opportunities, and no matter what they are, but especially if you're looking at something like a study abroad or an additional language, that's awesome. Take advantage of the programs that are there, like AUAP, like the international studies. Get involved. that it kind of like breaks the ice. If you're in with AUAP and then you decide to study abroad, you have an idea what you're getting into. Plus, you'll make friends that you'll have for the rest of your life. I have learned, like I said, educationally, I've learned more than I could have ever hoped. And just in my personal life, I've grown more than I could have imagined from the international experience.
Wonderful. And I think that's a good note to end on. I want to thank all of our presenters, Mike, Kendall, Nick, Coco, for taking the time, especially Coco, because it's now about 5 a.m., getting on 5:30 there in Japan. So she's up early for us. Appreciate all of you spending the time. Students, if you're interested in going abroad, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Again, my email address, my direct email address is steven.cook@cwu.edu. You can also come see us in Hebler 102, and that's where our office is. And I look forward to speaking to you. Thank you to everyone again. All right.
Thank you, Steve.